Welcome to the Inspire podcast. This is the third instalment. Today we've got Ben Parks from PSR Solutions with us, who is the freelance director and expert on all things IR35. Ben, welcome.
Hello.
Good to spend some time with you going over IR35. There's a lot of information in the public domain at the minute. Could you just give us an overview of a bit about the background of IR35 and where we are at present with the legislation?
No problem. IR35 is a long-standing piece of legislation that's been in place since, I think, 2000, and it's concerning the tax status of freelance limited company workers. In particular, HMRC's target is on those workers they believe are working through a limited company but are indeed working in a similar way to an equivalent permanent employee, and hence should be taxed accordingly, rather than being taxed as a business operating outside of IR35 for separate businesses. Okay,
and from what I've read about IR35, it's already been implemented within the public sector.
Yeah, so IR35, as I said, has been around for 20 years. The reason why it's kind of very much a concern at the moment, there has been some changes 3 years ago in the public sector called off-payroll legislation, which is an extension to IR35. This off-payroll legislation is actually now, it's in draft legislation to be changed in April 2020 in the private sector. And what that means is the IR35 status of individual contractors will no longer be determined by them. It's shifting to the end client.
Right.
And hence that's kind of why it's become quite a big piece of news and a big topic of discussion across all industries within the UK, because construction, IT, the public sector, energy and gas, they're all heavily reliant on freelance workers, and most of those operate through a limited company, and all of a sudden the status of their tax status has become their business.
Yeah, okay. And how did 3 years ago the public sector change? How did it impact the public sector?
As a business, we don't trade in the public sector. All of our clients are private sector, but from kind of speaking to people within that market, speaking to accountants, speaking to contractors that work across both private and public, there was quite a bit of initial upheaval. The public sector bodies that it affected didn't quite know what it meant, and would end up taking a risk-averse approach, and would kind of determine a lot of contractors inside of R35 and classed as deemed employees, rather than outside of R35 and carry on as business as usual.
Okay, so this is where establishments have taken a blanket approach. Yep. And deemed everybody inside, regardless of what task they've been doing. Do you think that approach will be taken in the private sector as well?
Hopefully not. However, there are signs across the banking sector and some companies within the construction sector that they are taking a similar approach. They don't want to get involved with the risk of determining people outside and then subsequently carrying that tax risk moving forward, and taking quite a conservative approach. And to be honest, half don't blame people, blame companies, because IR35 is a complex piece of legislation, and there's no one straightforward answer which classifies you inside or outside. There are a number of factors that can determine it. And for instance, for a company, for a large blue chip contractor or any large business, they could have 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 freelance workers, and they've got to try and pick through all of those workers and try and decide whether they're inside, outside. And as you can imagine, it's quite a big task for HR departments or whoever's picking this up within businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And with these businesses, where do you think the education levels are with IR35? Obviously focusing on the construction sector at the minute.
Yeah.
Where do you think companies are in the process of actually having a plan, strategy in place to either blanket decision or take individual cases? Where would you put the industry at the minute?
I would say on a 1 to 10 of 10 being prepared and 1 not, we're at 2 and 3 out of 10.
Right. Okay.
There are a few companies that seem to be ahead of the curve, but I think speaking to a lot of our clients, a lot of our freelance contractors, there's still a lot of question marks. A lot of people haven't had any communication, and with the legislation fast approaching, there's a lot of work to be done.
Okay, and I understand you've been doing a bit of lobbying against IR35. Can you just give us a bit of background in terms of who you've spoken to, how those meetings went, and at what sort of level they were?
Yeah, I've seen 3 MPs over the last 12-18 months. Mike Wood, the Conservative MP for Dudley South, Jeremy Lefroy, I met Jeremy with yourself, who's the MP for Stafford, and Gavin Williamson, who's the current Education Secretary, who's the MP for South Staffordshire.
Okay.
I've met Gavin twice, and obviously he's quite an important person. He's kind of a member of Boris Johnson's inner circle. But at the moment, you seem to get a lot of sympathy from your MPs, but they will then kind of send a letter or send an email to the Treasury, and you normally get back a stock response, which is kind of HMRC and the Treasury's view on what's happening within the market, and no progress is being made.
So you're pretty certain that this legislation will get passed and it will be in effect from April 2020, in your opinion?
I would be surprised if it gets delayed. There seems to be quite a strong political agenda for it to be pushed through for April, even in the light of an election in 5 weeks' time, Brexit round the corner. It seems that it's in draft legislation and it's going to get pushed through. The right thing to do would for it definitely to be pushed back another 12 months, because we could be in a position where the budget is in Jan-Feb, and there's no, and at the moment the legislation isn't finalised. So how can businesses prepare properly when they haven't got a completed piece of legislation to work with? But it does appear that it's going to be, I'd be surprised if it doesn't come through for April 2020.
Okay. In the conversations that we had with the MP, I think we all agree that people that are acting in a really should be in a permanent position and are generally not a freelance contractor and are using the payment method as just a tax dodge for a better word. I think we all agree that they should be caught inside of this. However, the vast majority of freelance workers that are working in the right nature of it, and I think the phrase that was used was the sledgehammer to crack a nut, I think sums it up pretty well. Could you just give us some, I know you've got quite a few stats on this in terms of the amount of revenue that the Treasury are looking to get back from this scheme and why it's been pushed through?
I think HMRC have kind of done some research. Where that research was done is debatable, and they've come up with a figure of, I think it was 2.5 billion over the next 3 years in extra tax due to their perceived non-compliance. But that is highly disputed. That's actually an accurate figure for one. That's their justification that why they should be doing it.
Okay, so just going right back in terms of the understanding of IR35, because I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there and lots of information flying around. Just give us an overview in terms of the three areas of IR35 where you may be deemed inside, outside. I believe there's three key areas that contractors would look at.
Yeah, well, to be operating outside of R35, it's quite simple. You need to be working as a business. You are no longer an employee seeking a job. Yeah. You're operating your own freelance business, offering a business-to-business service to various clients. Yeah. If what you're doing looks like employment, then the chances are you're operating inside of R35. So, as you mentioned, there probably are three kind of main areas regarding IR35 and being outside of the legislation, and they are control, personal service, and the right to substitute, and mutuality of obligation. Okay. If you can demonstrate a lack of control with your client, if you can demonstrate that it's not a personal service and you have a genuine right to substitute yourself in that assignment, and if you've got no obligation to the end client and they've got no obligation to you as a worker, then you're a long way to being outside of R35. Yeah. But it's about demonstrating those working practices married up with the contractual side of it, which will make somebody compliant and working outside of the legislation. Okay,
no, that's good. That's really insightful. Public sector came in 3 years ago, as we've discussed. Obviously, certain members of the public sector had the opportunity to come over to the private sector and still work as a freelance contractor. That option will not be on the table for private sector workers. So, do you believe that this is going to change the face of contracting, freelancing as we know it?
Personal view is initially that there's going to be a shock. There's going to be 6 months of confusion. I think there will be a conservative approach from a lot of clients, but there is, I'm talking construction, and I assume it would be the same in other specialist sectors like IT. There is a staffing shortage. There is a resource issue across construction. And there's always going to be a requirement for good freelance temporary resource to offer specialist skills. And I think in the private sector, you might have a percentage of the industry taking quite a negative view, and if the other percentage of the industry try and work compliantly with it, they will get the best access to the best freelance staff. Yes. And I think medium term to long term, it will recover, but it's kind of getting through that first period of uncertainty. Okay, that's interesting. So, if we, you mentioned some banks and some clients have taken this blanket approach, if you like. If any of the listeners are a contractor that has been caught on a blanket approach and they do believe that they genuinely are outside of IR35, what's your recommendation on challenging that? I suppose the first thing is don't jump into action without getting the proper advice. Okay. I think your first port of call would be to find out why. If a company you're freelancing at says they believe you are falling within IR35, ask them why, ask for proof, ask for reasons, and they should be giving you answers along the basis of control, substitution, financial risk, mutuality of obligation. Get that evidence from them. And then your next port of call would be speaking to an IR35 specialist to discuss your contract, discuss your working practices, actually doing your own IR35 assessment. And there's lots of kind of companies out there offering that service. And once you have all that information, go back to your clients and say why you don't fall within that legislation. Okay. And realistically, that's that's all you can do. My recommendation to anybody is never accept a role inside of R35. I think you could be opening yourself up to historical investigations from HMRC. They're saying they won't do that, but evidence from the past is they have done and probably will do again.
Yeah. Okay, so you talk about the evidence side of it and actually doing your own assessment.
Yeah.
Obviously, we all know the CEST tool.
Yeah.
And for those that aren't aware of the CEST tool, could you just give us an overview of what that is and other technologies that you're aware of that would be able to conduct that assessment?
So the CEST tool is essentially the government's tool to assess contractors' employment statuses.
Yeah.
So it's their answer to an IR35 assessment. Now, HMRC say they will stand by results given by CEST, but there is again already evidence that they're kind of trying to ignore people's outside of IR35 statuses in court after they've used CEST. And I suppose my advice is to anyone is why would you want to use HMRC's tool when they're the people trying to find more and more people inside of R35?
Yeah.
You're better off using a neutral tax data specialist to do a more thorough test. I mean, the CEST tool actually at the moment emits key case law regarding R35, in particular mutuality of obligation. HMRC have actually, their view on mutuality of obligation is different to case law.
Right, okay.
And it's actually ignored in CEST. They're saying they're going to get it, they're actually changing CEST and improving it by the end of the year.
Okay.
But if you speak to experts, they're very doubtful that the improvements will have any significance to the success of that tool.
Okay. So in terms of the challenge faced by yourself, I mentioned in the intro that you're a commercial specialist. Could you just, for I guess the cohort that is construction listeners that we have, could you just give an idea for certain positions that you think will be heavily affected by this?
I wouldn't say it's a case of what positions would be affected. I think it will affect all positions on a freelance basis. And it's whether you're a site manager, an engineer, a quantity surveyor. If you are being managed within a management chain, you haven't got the right to substitution, and you don't carry relevant business insurances with showing financial risk. You will be affected, but there's no reason whether you're a site manager, a QS, an engineer, legitimately going to offer a specialist freelance service that you can't operate compliantly outside of R35. But your knowledge of R35 as a contractor needs to go from a 2 or 3 out of 10 to a 7 or 8 out of 10, because if you don't know what R35 is and what makes somebody caught up within it or operating compliantly, then there's no way you're going to be able to defend yourself and convince your clients that you are working outside of R35.
Okay, no, understood. So we've obviously touched it in quite a lot of detail in terms of IR35, and I hope that's been insightful to people to get a bit of background on it, and obviously you're well read on the subject. What is your plan now with what are we 5 months, 6 months away from this coming through? What's your plan to educate? I think is probably the strategy that you're looking to take your workforce that are currently contracting and work with clients. What's your approach to this?
Well, you just stole my approach, which is education.
Okay.
It's getting out there and speaking to as many freelance contractors as possible to actually kind of discuss IR35, kind of what they know, what they don't know. Hopefully there's thousands of IR35 experts out there, but if there's not, we need to be speaking to people who are working through PSR and working through other agencies working direct for clients and kind of improving that IR35 knowledge across the freelance industry. So those who are working compliantly but don't know it, those who are pretty much compliant but could just change a few things, that they do so they can kind of shift from being a bit grey and might get caught up within IR35. They make a few tweaks to what they're doing. They can operate compliantly outside of IR35 post-April.
Okay, and in terms of so that's great in terms of your contractors, and you're going to be conducting, I guess, some form of roadshow to get out and speak with them and educate them. I know that you've partnered with an organisation to offer advice as well, which is Kudos. Could you just give us an idea of who Kudos are and why you've chosen them to work with clients?
Kudos are pretty much a market leading tax data specialist surrounding R35. They're a company that have kind of been around from when R35 became legislation in 2000, and they have represented a lot of freelance contractors against HMRC, defending them and their R35 status. They employ a lot of tax data specialists, and they can really kind of help clients, agencies and contractors in understanding their R35 status. One thing we did earlier in the year with them was kind of they came in and audited kind of upper level contracts, lower level contracts, and kind of how we're engaging with contractors to try and kind of tweak what we're doing. And we've also been to see a number of clients with a tax data specialist from Kudos to kind of help educate them on what IR35 is and what they can do to be more compliant and change what they're doing. And I think for anyone who is worried about their IR35 status in its current form, where it's self-governed by freelance businesses, or in the proposed off-payroll form, they're a company to be speaking to if you're concerned about your IR35 status, because they can do an IR35 status test, their version of CEST, which is a lot more thorough. And if that test comes as outside of R35, there is an insurance policy to go with it. Okay. So in terms of that insurance policy, by the way, could you just before we wrap this up, just give us an idea of what that insurance entails? What does that do for a client contractor? What is that? So I believe it's an insurance where Kudos would represent that contractor against HMRC if there was an IR35 investigation, and if the subsequent investigation was lost and that contractor was deemed inside, they would indemnify against some of the tax lost. What the exact amounts are, I don't know, but that's the basis.
It's that peace of mind, isn't it, for the contractor? I guess it's belief in the technology from Kudos to offer that insurance policy, and then that peace of mind for the contractor that they're not going to have a historical claim coming back to haunt them based on that. Ben, that's been great. Appreciate your time. What we'll do in the show notes is put Ben's contact details. Should anyone want to get in contact directly with Ben, please do so. As we said, Ben's conducting a roadshow of speaking with people. Hopefully it's come across that he's very well educated on the subject, having spoke to a number of people myself on this. I don't think I've come across anyone as educated as Ben on the subject, and Ben's putting himself out there to speak with people, educate them, and help get people in a better position where they currently are, to help them come April 2020 to be in a far better position. So I hope you've enjoyed this. The podcast is there to inspire. I know this isn't a very inspirational subject, but what this is doing is Ben is, for me, is gone out there, he's researched this subject because it certainly matters to him, and should inspire people that if they're coming up against the challenge, to go and educate themselves, read up on it, go and lobby, meet MPs, do something about it. And for me, that's the inspirational message that's coming across on this episode. So Ben, thanks a lot for your time, and I hope it all goes well building up to April 2020.
Thank you.
Cheers.